Huijoo is an ambitious woman who's willing to risk everything to rise above her status. However, everything changes when she traps herself in a contract marriage with the most powerful man in the kingdom. Now, what starts as a perfect plan slowly falls apart as the two get way too close and can't stop themselves from falling for each other. The story follows Huijoo, a brilliant and ambitious young woman from a wealthy family in a society where the monarchy still holds power. Despite excelling at the top of her class, she's constantly looked down on for not being of noble birth. Determined to prove herself, Huijoo becomes fiercely competitive, willing to do whatever it takes to come out on top. In contrast to Huijoo, there is Eyan, the grand prince of the kingdom, born into royalty, yet he drifts through life with nothing to strive for. One day, Huijoo gets invited to the king's birthday and shows up in red, which is basically royal disrespect, but Huijoo lives for chaos and clout. Naturally, everyone still eats it up, and her outfit sells out instantly. At the party, people gossip about her illegitimate status, but Huijoo shuts it down fast, showing them why she's infamous. After arguing with her good-for-nothing brother, Taeju, Huijoo has to sit at the back courtesy of her commoner status. Soon, Eyan arrives fashionably late and in the wrong outfit, making the queen, Yurong, annoyed. Huijoo later bumps into her only noble friend, Jungwoo, the prime minister, while Eyan later begs Jungwoo to help him dodge marriage like it's a plague. Later, Huijoo gets lost in the palace and runs into Eyan, and it turns out they attended the same school, but Huijoo cannot stand him because he easily got the privileges she only dreams of. A sudden fire in the king's quarters interrupts their reunion, and Eyan rushes to the scene, traumatized since his older brother, King Seonjeong, literally died the same way. As soon as Queen Yurong arrives, she blames Eyan and slaps him, but the next moment, the king, Yeon, appears unharmed. The following day, Yurong apologizes for slapping Eyan, but she feels no remorse as she detests how his presence as the grand prince overshadows her son, the king. But Eyan has to be the regent because his nephew Yeon is too young. Eyan is tired of everyone telling him to hide his light, especially his father, who always changed his title just to teach him never to stand in his brother's way. Now, Yurong is doing the same thing by trying to make Eyan marry an unremarkable woman of her choice. Elsewhere, Huijoo's dad tries to set her up with the most forgettable man alive so she won't compete for the inheritance with her useless brother. However, Huijoo refuses to be controlled, especially not by Taeju and his delusional wife, Dayang. A few days later, Eyan decides to leave the palace to clear his head, and on the way, runs into Yurang's annoying father, Inpyeong. Afterwards, Yurong vents to Inpyeong about Eyan overshadowing the throne. Elsewhere, Huijoo scans Temu for an eligible bachelor befitting her status. But when she finds none, she gets the brilliant idea to marry Eyan and secure that nobility upgrade. She then sends several applications to visit him, but Eyan rejects them all, until she reapplies as his junior alumnus, and he instantly approves her request to meet. That night, she arrives at his residence and casually proposes a contract marriage. Unfortunately, Eyan isn't fazed by her request because he receives marriage proposals even in his dreams. Huijoo explains that she's different and further lists out her strengths, which mostly consist of money, beauty, and her crazy brain. At the same time, Yurong meets up with Jae-gyong, whom she plans to set up with Eyan. Meanwhile, Eyan rejects Huijoo's proposal because he wants to marry for love. But that doesn't faze Huijoo because she always gets what she wants, no matter the cost. She then orders a full investigation into Eyan's schedule, and then starts popping up everywhere he goes like a very determined ghost. At some point, Eyan begins to dread Huijoo's appearance. One day, Huijoo goes to Eyan's art gallery for the blind date set by her family, but she almost makes her date cry because of his fragile ego. Seeing that Huijoo's ambition is too much for him to handle, he immediately rejects her on the spot. However, Eyan's aide, Hyeon, sees her on the date and reports to Eyan, who is a little jealous about it. When Hyeon expresses his satisfaction that Huijoo is not one of the queen's people, Eyan lets him know that there's no way a drama queen like Huijoo can collude with Yurong, who is drunk on nobility. Elsewhere, Yurong reminisces about her husband and how he tried to abdicate the throne. Back then, she threw a fit and wished him dead, and after their argument, a fire broke out in his quarters, ultimately sending him to the afterlife. But she's not the only one who has trouble sleeping because of the incident, as Eyan also suffers from nightmares because of it. The following day, Yurang prepares Yeon for an award event that Eyan will not be attending. She sees this as an opportunity for her son to shine. Meanwhile, Eyan is worried about Eyan because he's too young for all the responsibilities forced on him, yet he decides not to attend the event so Yerong doesn't blame him again for hogging the spotlight. Elsewhere, Huijoo prepares to attend the same event, but her secretary, Haejung, instructs her not to dress like a peacock seeking attention. Meanwhile, Eyan is treated like trash by his aides until Eyan arrives and scolds them. Eyan had called him because he was scared, and now he's so happy when he sees Eyan. As Eyan steps onto the stage, the flickering lights almost make him cave, but Eyan takes his hand, giving him courage. When Huijoo is invited to receive her award, she takes the opportunity to hit on Eyan as usual. After the awards, she flaunts the hat given to her like an expensive Brazilian weave, even when Jongwoo takes her to a high-end restaurant to treat her to a celebratory meal. Embarrassed, Jongwoo urges her to take it off, and she does after a little persuasion. It soon becomes clear that Jongwoo is into Huijoo, and it has been that way since their school days. Elsewhere, Eyan panics as Eyan comes down with a fever. However, Eyan doesn't want him to call a doctor because the queen might find out and turn it into a big deal to push for his marriage again. Later, Eyan runs into Huijoo, who is also staying at the same hotel, and asks for her help. Huijoo then calls her family's doctor and afterwards begs him not to tell anyone about Eyan. Back in the palace, Yerang is furious with the king for calling Eyan to the event. She especially hates how her son's cowardliness reminds her of her late husband's. At the hotel, Huijoo and Eyan are enjoying a sandwich when Eyan gets the news about the queen's arrival. He tries to stop her, but Yerang barges inside. Luckily she doesn't see Huijoo. Yerang's face turns to mush when Eyan appears in a robe, giving her a glimpse of his 10 packs. Unfortunately, on her way out, Yerang notices Huijoo's purse and rushes back into the bedroom to find her there. The following day, things begin to turn in Huijoo's favor after the news of her late-night rendezvous somehow spreads. A picture of the doctor was captured, making everyone speculate about her pregnancy for Eyan. Huijoo is excited about the news because clout is what she lives for. However, Queen Yerang is not too thrilled as she hates anything or anyone who tramples on her precious royal dignity. Haejung scolds Huijoo as this might draw trouble, but Huijoo is unconcerned because her skin is thicker than a dragon's. Later, Eyan meets with Huijoo at his residence and apologizes for making her face criticism. When he asks what she wants as compensation, Huijoo presents her marriage proposal again. She asks Eyan to marry her and help her defeat her brother for the inheritance. In exchange, she promises to be Eyan's shield and help him clear all obstacles. She explains that her brother is incompetent, but their father will choose him as a successor because he's a legitimate child who married a noble woman. Eyan agrees to her proposal but reminds her that she's about to become public enemy number 1. After their agreement, Eyan takes Huijoo to the palace to establish their relationship, causing a frenzy. On their way, Eyan is forced to stop by the queen's palace alone, where she demands he deny the dating rumors. However, Eyan firmly declares that he has no intention of doing that. After his meeting, Eyan returns to his room to find Huijoo giving the king junk food. He harshly scolds her for being reckless, as that might give the queen more ammunition. Afterwards, he informs her that the queen rejected their request to date. Huijoo then asks who he would choose if she were to fight with the queen. Eyan assures her that he will obviously pick her side as they need to appear madly in love. That night, Eyan and Huijoo share a room to sell their dating rumor. However, they turn it into a royal rumble, causing the palace attendants to think they're engaging in extracurriculars. The following day, Huijoo happily heads to work in the same outfit to let the world know she spent a night at the palace. Later, Jongwoo visits Huijoo to ask about her relationship with Eyan. Huijoo assures him that they're in love and begs him to help get her marriage approved. Unfortunately, the queen decides to take a sick leave, and when Eyan learns about this, he realizes it's her ploy to delay his marriage. At the same time, Huijoo is egged by Eyan's fans, but she puts them in their place. After taking down one obstacle, Huijoo is faced with her father, Hyunguk's sudden visit, and he reminds her of her stepmother's death anniversary. This is because her stepmother suffered a heart attack and died on the first day Huijoo suddenly reunited with her father. Ever since then, Hyunguk has been wary of her, especially how she competes for everything her brother has. Hyunguk warns her not to fight for her brother's inheritance, but Huijoo remains defiant even when he threatens to disown her. That night, Eyan calls to check on her, but Huijoo is too moody to talk, so he suddenly shows up at her house to cheer her up, leaving Huijoo stunned. Eyan is visibly worried when he learns that she was egged by fans, so he immediately moves her into his private residence. Huijoo makes sure to cling to him like gum to convince the attendants that they're madly in love. Later, Huijoo asks Eyan why he agreed to marry her, and he explains that it's because she's the only one who wouldn't condemn him if he tries to usurp the throne. The following day, Yerong sends officials to storm Huijoo's room and workplace, accusing her of arson during the king's birthday. She tries to call Eyan, but can't reach him because he's busy with the ancestral rites, so she calls Haejung to find him at all costs. However, Huijoo's steward, Youngmoon, informs her that they need a token to enter the shrine. Huijoo recalls stealing Eyan's token from high school and immediately gives it to Youngmoon so that he can help Haejung access the shrine. After gaining access to the shrine, Haejung disguises herself to meet with Hyeon since she can't reach Eyan. Meanwhile, Huijoo is taken into the palace, but just before she can be questioned, Eyan arrives. He tries to use his authority to stop the investigation, but the queen suddenly stops him. Even though Eyan explains that he was with her on the day of the fire, Yerong doesn't care and makes it clear that she just wants to ruin Huijoo's reputation. Huijoo then pretends to collapse, and Eyan uses the opportunity to take her away. Afterwards, he assures her that the queen will not pursue the bogus claim anymore, as that might tarnish her reputation. However, Huijoo lets him know that her reputation is already in the mud because the palace attendants are a news network on their own. Just as she predicted, rumors spread, turning the queen into a wicked pariah, and she's furious when it reaches her ears. While sending Huijoo back to the residence, Eyan opens the car door to fuel the rumors about their love. After returning to the residence, Huijoo can't stop thinking about how Eyan scooped her up in front of everyone. Later, Eyan calls to inform her that she'll be under the protection of the royal guard even though they're not married. Since this is a ploy to fuel the rumors about their love story more, Huijoo decides to take it further by sneaking out to visit Eyan in the palace. Eyan and Huijoo climb over the roof like lovesick fools, and as Eyan gets carried away in the moment, he suddenly kisses her. Huijoo is taken aback by the sudden kiss, until Eyan explains that a paparazzi is watching them. So she asks Eyan for more so that they can get her good side. The next morning, the pictures of their late-night meeting spread, forcing the cabinet to meet to discuss Eyan and Huijoo's relationship. Everyone disagrees with the relationship except Jungwoo, but he makes it clear that it should be strictly dating and not marriage. Eyan accepts the little win even though he was gunning for them to approve his marriage to Huijoo. Jungwoo also makes Eyan move back to the palace since Huijoo will be staying at his private residence. Yerong is furious when she learns that their relationship was approved, but Impyong blames her for making a move against Huijoo, which only helped them. He warns her to stay out of it and promises to handle Huijoo without getting his hands dirty. Huijoo is not too pleased when she learns that their relationship was approved with no marriage in sight. She figures that the cabinet did this to make her relationship with Eyan fizzle out like an uncooked sausage. So, she decides to fuel the rumors more by going out with Eyan. Later, Youngmoon dresses Huijoo up in my grandmother's tablecloth, almost making Eyan gag. Huijoo decides to just dress casually, and Eyan immediately approves of it. She then takes him to watch a baseball match, where they run into Jungwoo at the stadium. Shortly afterwards, Eyan and Huijoo are caught in a kiss cam, but Huijoo politely declines because royals are supposed to observe decorum. After the game, the royal guard surrounds them, preventing Huijoo from being the center of attention. Jungwoo then invites her for a meal alone, since Eyan, as royalty, has a lot of restrictions on where he can eat. However, Eyan forces himself in as a third wheel. At the restaurant, he refuses to eat because royals are not supposed to eat any raw food, reminding Eyan about all the rules forced on him, especially by his father. Huijoo is fed up with all the rules, and Jungwoo advises her to give up on marrying Eyan. But raw fish is the last thing that can keep Huijoo from achieving her lifelong dream of status. That night, court lady Jinsuk scolds Eyan for going to the baseball match, so she takes permission from him to teach Huijoo about court etiquette. But the following morning, Huijoo completely ignores Jinsuk and manages to escape. Later, Eyan calls her about it, and Huijoo agrees to take the lessons when she returns home. Elsewhere, Taejun is jealous that Huijoo is moving up the social ladder, but his wife Dayoung reminds him that it's a good thing. Because once Huijoo marries the prince, she can't fight him for the inheritance, as royals aren't allowed to engage in economic activities. Elsewhere, Haejung asks Huijoo about her sports car and learns that it was taken for repairs after some mysterious person rammed into it. The moment Huijoo returns home, Jinsuk immediately begins lecturing her on royal etiquette, but as usual, Huijoo hijacks the lesson, turning it into a compulsory Pilates session. A few moments later, Eyan arrives, and she rushes into his arms, begging him to save her. Eyan agrees and tells Jinsuk to return to the palace. The following day, during her lessons, Huijoo learns that after Eyan's mother died, his father passed away shortly after, and then his brother. She pretends to cry and uses it as an excuse to skip class. Afterwards, she reads about the cause of their death and finds it suspicious because Eyan's mother died in a car accident, his father died of a sudden heart attack, and his brother died in a fire. Feeling bad for Eyan, Huijoo calls him, but he's too busy forcing himself to attend a blind date set up by the queen. However, Eyan turns it against her and coldly rejects his date before storming off. After the meeting, Eyan calls Huijoo, and she comforts him, assuring him that she'll always be on his side no matter what. But he simply cuts the call, leaving Huijoo puzzled. However, Eyan is touched by her words and immediately decides to return to his private residence. Elsewhere, Jungwoo picks the king up from school, and as he watches other kids move freely, Yeon wishes he could simply be one of them. He then asks Jungwoo to take him to Eyan's private residence, where Huijoo is busy destroying all their ceramic plates because of her etiquette lessons. Afterwards, she commends Yeon for playing hooky and decides to play with him. Elsewhere, Daeong is mocked by Eyan's blind date, Jaegyeong, for marrying a commoner wimp like Taejun. But Daeong reminds her that her place as the Grand Prince's wife has been stolen by Huijoo. Meanwhile, Yeon enjoys several games with Huijoo, Jungwoo, and the attendants, after which he demands a ride in Huijoo's sports car. At first, they refuse, but after much persuasion, Jungwoo agrees. Huijoo drives the king while Jungwoo discreetly follows behind. Unfortunately, Huijoo's brakes suddenly fail, causing her to speed dangerously through a busy road. Thankfully, Eyan suddenly appears in front of her to slow down her car a bit before blocking her path to completely stop the car. After learning about the incident, Yurang rushes to the royal hospital, where the king, Eyan, and Huijoo were rushed to keep things under wraps. Yurang is furious when she learns that the king was in Huijoo's vehicle, but Jungwoo stops her from causing trouble, as that might alert the public about the king's involvement. As soon as he wakes up, Yeon visits Huijoo and apologizes, but Huijoo assures him that he's not to blame. She panics when she learns about Eyan's surgery and rushes into his room to check on him, but he gently pats her head, catching Huijoo off guard. The next day, Huijoo is accused of driving recklessly, and this causes the company's stock price to plummet. Haejung wants Huijoo to release a statement, but Huijoo refuses, explaining that the king was in her car. Haejung is furious to hear this because Huijoo has to be the scapegoat. Jungwoo overhears them talking about Huijoo's sham marriage, so he asks her to marry him instead. After she's discharged, Huijoo discovers that Eyan left the hospital without telling her. She realizes he must have overheard her conversation with Jungwoo after Haejung reveals that she saw him in front of Huijoo's room earlier. The moment she arrives at his private residence, Huijoo is kicked out by Eyan, but he refuses to answer her calls, and he had overheard her talking with Jungwoo. The following day, Eyan agrees to see Huijoo, and on her way, she runs into the queen, who seems oddly satisfied after speaking to Eyan. When Huijoo meets Eyan, she asks if he heard her talking to Jungwoo, but he denies it and informs her that someone messed with the brakes of her car. He then calls off their marriage, explaining that it's because she doesn't respect rules. Afterwards, Huijoo meets up with her father and brother as they chew her out for the accident. Hyungkook already found out that Huijoo was thrown out of Eyan's residence, but Huijoo ignores him and storms out. She then instructs Haejung to investigate the shop where her car was repaired. Meanwhile, Hyun asks Eyan why he broke up with Huijoo, and Eyan explains that it's to keep her alive because his mother also died in an accident, and he couldn't protect her. He made up his mind to protect Huijoo by keeping her away from the palace. It turns out Jungwoo met with Eyan and asked him to let Huijoo go for her protection. Eyan decides to give Huijoo a parting gift by inviting her to the inner court banquet, an event where only top nobles gather. Eyan sends Hyun to give Huijoo the invitation and a traditional dress for the event, but she rejects it. Eyan is disappointed because he got the invitation from the queen after she heard that they were breaking up. Eyan then tells Hyun to invite Huijoo to the palace so that he can convince her himself, but she refuses to see him. For the next couple of days, Huijoo refuses Eyan's invitations and calls, leaving him frustrated. Later on, Huijoo learns that the dude who tampered with her car is missing, so she tells Haejung to check the surveillance of the convenience store in front of the shop. That night, Eyan sends Huijoo a message to meet up, and she agrees. When they finally meet, she scolds him for breaking their engagement, but Eyan explains that it's for her protection. Huijoo calls him a coward, and to demonstrate how he's supposed to protect someone, she almost shoots an arrow at his precious cat. But before she can, Eyan stops her, injuring himself in the process. Huijoo lets him know that he needs to fight back to protect what he loves instead of hiding in the shadows like he always does. At the office, Haejung and her team finally find a picture of the culprit and realize he used their company's banking application to pay at the store. Huijoo then asks Taejun to help her find the guy since he's in charge of their banking subsidiary. Taejun instantly agrees to help after learning that the dude tried to murk Huijoo. Elsewhere, Jungwoo thinks about his conversation with Huijoo after he asked her to marry him. She refused his offer because her scandals could cost him his job, but it's different for Eyan, who will remain royalty for life. Meanwhile, Eyan can't stop thinking about Huijoo, so he calls her, asking her to attend the event, after which he apologizes for not keeping his promise. The following day, Eyan visits Huijoo to tell her the rules of the banquet since she has decided to attend. But the rules only pisses Huijoo off as she learns that she has to stand at the back of the procession because she has no rank in court. That night, Eyan invites Huijoo for a stroll, but she walks behind him to practice the rules and complains that it's hard for her because she's usually the trendsetter. The following day, everyone arrives for the inner court banquet while Huijoo prepares to be fashionably late as usual. After their stroll last night, Eyan had asked her to teach him how to walk ahead because he's only used to walking behind, and Huijoo told him to walk beside her. Meanwhile, Taeju finally finds the culprit who messed with Huijoo's car. Unfortunately, he's dead. At the banquet, Queen Yeorong soon arrives, after which Huijoo makes her grand entrance in a white suit instead of the required traditional attire. When the press asks Huijoo why she arrived after the queen, she smugly explains that she got lost in the palace. However, Yeorong can tell it's to make a mockery of her, but she tries to keep her cool. During the procession, Yeorong realizes that Huijoo is sweating from the hot sun, so she happily decides to extend the walk. Unfortunately, her plan for revenge is crushed when Eyan makes his way to the front hand in hand with Huijoo, breaking all protocols. Later that night, Huijoo prepares for the banquet while the king also gets ready without his mother's knowledge because Eyan asked him to keep it a secret. After Yeorong arrives at the banquet grounds, Huijoo and Eyan make their grand entrance like Cinderella and Prince Charming. Yeorong is over the moon and even allows them to dance alone, as it's supposed to be Huijoo's last royal show. But after the dance, Eyan takes everyone by surprise, including Huijoo, as he proposes to her with his mother's ring. Huijoo accepts, and they ask the king for his blessings, leaving Yeorong stunned. She signals for Yeon to say no, but he ignores her, publicly giving them his blessings. Jungwoo is frustrated by the sudden turn of events, while Yeorong begs him to use his veto power to vote against it, but he tells her that he will never contradict the crown. After they return to the banquet, Eyan and Huijoo decide to divide and conquer. Eyan asks Yeorong for a dance as she lets him know that he'll never get her blessing. But Eyan reveals that he knows how she hid the truth about his brother's will to give the throne to him and not her son. Meanwhile, as Huijoo and Jungwoo dance, Huijoo begs Jungwoo to support her marriage. During a dance exchange, Yeorong realizes that Jungwoo has feelings for Huijoo. Jungwoo then promises to stand on Huijoo's side as long as she never hides anything from him again. After the banquet, Eyan and Huijoo celebrate their first victory, and while caught up in the moment, Eyan finds himself drawn to Huijoo. Afterwards, they meet with Haejung and Eyan to talk about their next strategy. Elsewhere, Daeyoung and Taejun celebrate becoming in-laws with the royal family, but Taejun is worried for Huijoo's safety. The following day, Impyeong confronts Yeorong about the proposal, but she tells him to let it go because Eyan knows that they changed the king's will. She explains that Huijoo has become Eyan's weakness, so keeping her close is a good thing. Elsewhere, Hyungkook is worried about Huijoo's safety, so he tells Daeyoung to call her family and find a way to plant people in the palace to watch out for Huijoo. Afterwards, Daeyoung and Taeju visit Huijoo to butter her up so that she can give them her company. But Huijoo immediately shuts them down, after which they inform her about the death of the dude who sabotaged her car. But Huijoo is only furious that someone murked the guy before she could. Later, Huijoo goes for an interview where all she does is flaunt her ring instead of responding to the questions, but Eyan is ecstatic when he sees the interview. That night, she returns to Eyan's private residence, where the attendants happily welcome her. Later, a maid named Ariam tries to unpack Huijoo's luggage, but Haejung stops her because she's a spy for the queen. It turns out, Huijoo had refused to move back to the residence, but Haejung agreed to it for Huijoo's safety. She also offered to move in with her when she learned about the queen's spy. The following day, Huijoo heads to the palace to discuss her wedding, and Eyan is excited about her visit, but his excitement vanishes when he learns that she came with Jungwoo. Fed up with Jungwoo getting too cozy with Huijoo, Eyan reminds him to maintain his distance. However, Jungwoo reveals that he knows that their marriage is a sham. After Jungwoo leaves, Eyan confronts Huijoo about it, and as their argument escalates, they decide to sign a confidentiality agreement. Just then, Yerong arrives, causing them to hide the contract and pretend to be all over each other. She then invites them to have dinner with her, but when she offers Huijoo booze, Eyan blocks it. However, Huijoo accepts the challenge, and while drunk, Yerong reminds Eyan how his father treated him like trash to keep him from surpassing his brother. She also blames him for the late king's death, but Eyan doesn't fight back. Fed up with the queen, Huijoo respectfully storms out of the dinner, pulling Eyan with her. Outside, Huijoo tells Eyan to be patient and promises to clear all the obstacles for him once they get married. Eyan is happy to hear this because no one has ever stood by his side, so he tells her to take him away from the palace. Huijoo then takes Eyan to her cruise ship to cheer him up and give him the Titanic experience. While playing Jack and Rose, they suddenly fall onto the deck, and as Eyan locks lips with Huijoo, they passionately exchange fluids. Thanks for sticking till the end, and to find out if Huijoo can tie the knot with her Prince Charming, make sure to comment "The Crown" for the next part.